so many golfers are highly, highly skilled, but even on a physical level, they just lack the prerequisites of being a good athlete. Now, that's changed dramatically. I think that's changed dramatically, especially in golf. And people sort of start to understand that now, but there's more things to it. And so, because I spent so much time before I started working with professionals, because I spent so much time working with juniors, I realized that from a body perspective, there were certain things that they just didn't possess at 17, 18, 19, and younger that they needed to be good athletes.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the ALWELLCO Podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space.
Well, welcome, Brendan. It's a real pleasure to have you as a guest on the ALWELLCO Podcast. Before we dive into your unique perspective, I wonder if you could just give our audience an overview of basically how we met and how we got connected and how you got connected to ALWELLCO.
Yeah, so my introduction, we have a mutual friend, Ian Meller, who's a fantastic golf coach down here in Florida. And he introduced us. And Andy, we spoke a couple weeks ago, and love what you guys do, love what you guys are about. So I wanted to be sort of a part of it and see how I could contribute.
That's great. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Brendan, the research I've done on you, golf seems completely, yeah, right? Golf seems very central to kind of your ethos and has been a big part of your career. Can you explain how you got into golf? Give us some highlights from your time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think worked in sport for a long time, worked with guys in the NHL, MLB, NFL in Canada, and I'm in the US now, I'm in Florida now. But golf's always been a very central thing. And golf's a unique sport because when I started and even continued to now, it's very much, one, it's an individual sport. So there's a lot of things that you can do that you can't do in team sport. And the sports science of golf was so young compared to other sports that it allowed us just to play around and sort of see, we had a lot more leeway, right? Rather than what guys who work with teams or girls who work with teams, you're sort of at the behest of what the team managers want and what the agents want and all of that. So golf being kind of the Wild West a little bit, at least, 10, 12 years ago. And the fact that it's an individual sport, it allows us as therapists, trainers, physicians, what have you, to do a lot more in the sport. So I'm forever grateful for it. So it's really fun. How I got started in it, basically, when I was back in Canada, started working with a whole bunch of just different junior camps, different types of players, amateurs, some Canadian professionals. And you do a good job and people tell other people, and that sort of slowly escalates over time. And then somewhere along the way, I got asked to come down to Florida to be the medical director for a golf academy down here. And at that time, I was working way too much in clinic and all of these things. So I thought Florida sounded a lot nicer than Canada in the winter. Moved down here, and then next thing I knew, I was kind of on the PGA Tour. And so that's sort of how it all started. And it was a real fun experience. I traveled on the PGA Tour right up until COVID time, basically. And then after COVID, I made the life decision that traveling 40 weeks a year was probably not the best for me. And so I still work with a lot of players here, Central Florida, kind of Orlando area. But I don't do much of the traveling anymore.
Fair enough. What was your role on the PGA Tour?
Yeah. So originally, what brought me out and kind of why players of any type, of any sport, sort of seek out folks is something's wrong, right? They're injured or they're not healthy or whatever, right? And so the original couple guys I started working with is because they were in pain. So they had some kind of pain issue that wasn't being solved with what they were traditionally accustomed to. And then that led to me and solved the pain problem. But once you solve the pain problems, it leads into okay, how do we sustainably increase performance? How do we increase health? How do we do all these things? And why did you get in pain to begin with? And I think the biggest thing, especially in golf, but all sports performance, is pain is just a signal of something that's not right in your life, right? Whether it's in your body or how you're practicing or what you're doing. And you can use that and overcome that, but then it's like, what do we do next? Right. So that kind of opened the door for a lot of things. So when I was on tour, it was sort of manual therapy, training, functional medicine, kind of combination of everything, looking at the areas that we needed to take off for different players to allow them to have sustained performance. Because for me, it was always the more resilient somebody is, then you give yourself more opportunity to compete more often, right? And in all sports, we see players who do really well for a little bit of time and then get hurt and disappear for a couple of years and then come back and do really well and disappear. And I never wanted that for any of the guys and girls that I've worked with over the years. So it's how combining all of those things together for sustained performance was really what we were after.
Sure. And did you work with all players or just a few players on the tour? How did that shake out?
So in professional golf, usually what happens is the tour has their own sort of designated therapists and trainers. And then more often than not, though, because of scheduling and time conflicts and stuff, a lot of players will bring out someone like myself. And so I worked with just a select few players, traveled with them 30, 40 weeks a year to all different tournaments all over the world. And kind of I was responsible for, 2 to 5 guys any given week. And for me, that really allowed the opportunity to do a lot with the guys, right? Because I had so much time with them. And it was a really fun experience because every week was different for different guys, right? And what we were working on was different. So it allowed a lot of variability as far as the therapy and the training, functional medicine, and all those things combined.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Brent. I'm itching. I'm Scottish, golf mad. Watch all the different tournaments, etc. Tell me you're not allowed to, but can you tell me some of the players you work with?
Yeah. So a couple guys I've worked with: Justin Rose, Henrik Stenson, Tommy Fleetwood, and a handful of other guys.
So all the top European British players. I love it.
Well, it's really funny. I being a Canadian, I always used to joke that seems like I just gravitated towards all the European guys. So historically, it's been a lot of English guys, a lot of European guys. Just over.
With a name like McLaughlin, you're going to be
right
leaning that way, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a most memorable moment from your time?
Look, there's so many fun ones, and it's an interesting question because I think anyone who's worked in sport, especially when you're traveling on the road, 99% of the time it's not glamorous. 99% of the time you're banging your head trying to figure out things, trying to help guys, trying to do all of this stuff, and it's work, right? The travel is work, the actual work is work, everything, and then you add on the stress of competition and all of those things, it's a lot. And I think memorable moments, first time I ever went to a PGA Tour event, and this is really funny because it sort of set a bizarre thing in my mind, which was so far removed from reality, because first time I ever went to a PGA Tour event, I flew with a player in a private plane, a very, very nice private plane, all the way to Hawaii. And we had steaks and we had all this cool stuff. And it was like, holy smokes, this is all new and exciting. And we got to the tournament, sort of did our thing. And the guy I was working with finished second at the tournament. So I was like, holy smokes, this is amazing. But that was not really reality. It was just sort of a fun introduction and kind of all aligned. And the day-to-day after that was sort of less exciting than that. So I always say for guys, because I get asked all the time by guys and girls, like, how do I get on a tour, what to expect and whatever. And the reality is most of the time you're staying in a Hilton Garden in the middle of nowhere, and it's not exciting or sexy or anything like that. But
Sure.
yeah, I think that was fun because that was sort of the first thing. And then obviously I've had guys, anytime a guy wins a tournament or a girl wins a tournament, that's a really, really cool experience, right? To have sort of a very small part in that. It's really cool. I've had guys get to world number one in the world, win major championships. That's all really, really fun. And it's fun. Those moments are really fun when we've set out a plan and worked on the process and done all of the right things and had an outcome like that, right? I think in golf, you can always have weeks where guys just sort of wake up and decide to play well and off they go and they win a tournament. But when in the moments where it's been a time where we've really had to plan out and be thoughtful of our process and everything that we do, and then that leads to success, that's the most rewarding thing for me. So those are moments are always fun.
So Brendan, you mentioned Ian Miller, our good friend, golf coach, someone's in there who's been in the ALWELLCO network. He's a big fan of one of our brands in there, Vivo Barefoot. He said something of you that really intrigued me. He said, Brendan has a huge influence on not just how I approach player development, but lifestyle to optimize health and performance. Tell me, how does it make you feel when peers like that say things like that about you? And, in your view, why is it so important for us to help each other?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lovely thing to say. And Ian, professionally and personally, has always been very supportive. And I think when we're dealing in sport, we're dealing in an environment of competition. And it's so easy to turn that competition that we're in against each other, right? Like, I'm right, you're wrong, everyone, whatever. And the best moments I've ever had with athletes is working with other people and smart minds, because none of us know everything. And there's a lot of moving pieces in any form of sport. And so I'm very grateful to have guys like Ian and other coaches and sports scientists and other therapists and stuff in my life who are very skilled and very smart that we can collaborate with. And then so I'm very, very fortunate to have kind of that network of people, because we all get better way faster when we actually work together. And I think Ian being an English guy too, there's something to European collaboration and English collaboration that unfortunately doesn't happen as much as I'd like in the US. But I really encourage anyone who's a trainer or a therapist or what have you, whatever sport you're working in, go talk to coaches. Like they want to know just as much as you want to know, and you can really, really expedite your learning on both ends. The more coaches you talk to and the more you can kind of understand the sport. So I spent a lot of time with golf coaches, and it's always been a really, really cool experience because we can learn so much from each other. And yeah, it's fun.
I mean, Brendan, I'm going to have to stop this podcast now, because you keep using this word that, as a Scotsman, that I am very competitive to. You keep saying this word called England or English. So I'm going to need you to broaden your horizons a little bit, or you and I are going to get into arm wrestling. Not that I'm passionate about Scotland at all, of course.
Yeah, no, I apologize, Andy. Absolutely.
No, I'm just messing with you.
Brendan, I'd like to talk about your approach a little bit. For golf being a sport that is so focused on skills and skill coaching, you seem to take holistic is a word that's overused, of course, but you take a more rounded approach, it seems. Body, mind, more things are involved. Can you talk us through what your approach is and maybe why it's been so successful?
Yeah. You're being very nice, Lauren. I think my approach in some ways is diametrically opposed to how golf is traditionally taught. What I just started to notice even a very long time ago, before I knew what I knew now, is so many golfers and you can extrapolate this out to other sports, but so many golfers are highly, highly skilled, but even on a physical level, they just lack the prerequisites of being a good athlete. Now, that's changed dramatically. I think that's changed dramatically, especially in golf. And people sort of start to understand that now, but there's more things to it. And so, because I spent so much time before I started working with professionals, because I spent so much time working with juniors, I realized that from a body perspective, there were certain things that they just didn't possess at 17, 18, 19, and younger, that they needed to be good athletes, to not get injured, to have sustained performance, all of these things. And then you extrapolate that out, really, the skill piece is sort of the very, very top of the iceberg, right? And there's so many things that go into that. And there's so many talented golfers. My goal is to allow their talent and their skill to shine consistently. And that means building a massive foundation of physical literacy. So making sure their body can do the things they need to do repeatedly. But then also working on diet and nutrition, and all of these things become a massive important piece to the puzzle. And then you get into the whole mindset piece of things. A mentor of mine famously said, never mistake bad psychology for bad physiology. And I took that to heart a long time ago. And so much of what we see, especially in golf, with sort of quote unquote mindset problems or struggles, and folks get mental coaches and all of that stuff, which is fine, comes down to physiology, right? So if I'm not hydrating properly, if I'm not eating the right things for me, if I have certain kind of conditions that I need to overcome, all of these things, well, then that'll have a direct effect on how we think in the context of playing a tournament of golf. And so those things have to be solved first. But because we acknowledge that the mental piece of it is so important, especially for golf. And so that's kind of where I come at it, is let's build the foundation. And oftentimes the foundation means, do I have the prerequisite, let's say skills, but not in the context of actually swinging a golf club, but do I have the prerequisite skills in life, right? Do I know what to eat? Do I know when to sleep? Do I understand the importance of food and all of these things and fueling my body? And then removing things that aren't serving me, right? Whether that's thoughts, feelings, emotions, whether that's some kind of toxicity in the system that's causing problems, whether that's a nutrient deficiency that's causing problems. If I can change those things, well, then I allow the athlete to express their full bandwidth of skill as far as swinging a golf club and playing the game much better.
Just picking up that, going a little bit deeper, is that, so what I think I just heard is that your whole philosophy revolves around not just physical levels of performance, but the development of all aspects of player health. Could you take our listeners through kind of a step-by-step guide as to what those various components are when you're working with players at, the level of the PGA Tour?
Yep. So for me, I've kind of developed a framework that I call the 7 levels. But really it starts on the physical level, because that's sort of how we experience the world. So that's sort of our entry point to creating change. So on the physical level, we're talking about anatomical structure, right? So height, weight, all of those things, that determines some of what we do with sport. Posture is a big, huge thing. Posture is a huge thing because if my resting posture is a certain way that's not advantageous for my sport, well, I can do all the exercises and I can do all the things I want to try and get stronger in ranges or trying to improve things. But if I can go back foundationally and fix some of the postural things, then I can get success with other things. The other thing with posture people don't realize too is the interplay with our nervous system. And so if joints are not in a place where they need to be posturally, well, that's a stress on the nervous system. If my spine's in a place where it's not supposed to be, that's a stress on the nervous system. And then all of a sudden someone has anxiety or all of these other problems or trouble focusing, but it can just come down to a postural thing, right? And kind of on the postural thing, big thing I look at is breath, because proper breathing patterns, again, are going to dramatically change what my nervous system does, dramatically change how I move. And so those are kind of the easy starting things on the physical level. And then we get into...
Can I just, if you don't mind, let me just pick up on that one, because that posture one's really interesting to me. Is that genetically, have you ever had a player that the posture was just so problematic that you just knew that it wasn't going to work?
Yeah.
You don't need to name them, obviously. I'm just intrigued about the case study.
I think it's a bigger thing with juniors, right? So you'll have juniors, it doesn't matter what sport, and mom and dad want them to play the sport, or they want to play the sport. And unfortunately, sometimes, and it's not that often, but sometimes there are folks who just aren't suited for the sport, right? They might be suited for other things. When you get to a professional level, they've self-selected the sport that their body is good at, right? So you think about the anatomical structure of an offensive lineman playing for the Denver Broncos. Well, that's a very different human than someone who's playing professional golf, right? Or professional volleyball or what have you. So it's all very, very different, and they will self-select the sports that they're just naturally better at, usually.
Okay.
The cool thing in golf is because there's so many ways to do it, you see lots of different types of bodies. And most sports now have become so streamlined, like all NFL quarterbacks kind of look the same, right? They're all 6'5", 220, whatever, right? The days of sort of the Doug Flutys are probably gone. But in golf, we get all shapes and sizes because they've figured out a way to work with their anatomy.
I know we harped on we wanted more information on the posture bit, but I do want you to finish your thought before we interrupted you.
Yeah. So kind of once we sort of deal with the posture piece, the structure piece, the breathing piece, then it comes down to looking at biochemistry, right? So can I manage my blood sugars properly? What's my digestion like? Do I have nutrient deficiencies? Is there any types of toxicities that are causing problems in the system? What's my organ function like? All of these things play a role in, one, how we move, two, the stress or lack of stress on the nervous system. If I have a digestive problem, that's very stressful for the nervous system, and that's going to show up as a performance problem. And then kind of I get up into dealing directly with the nervous system, right? So there's things as far as the autonomic nervous system, sort of our sympathetic, parasympathetic, that can be adjusted depending on the person, or need to be adjusted depending on the person. Now, usually when we solve the foundational stuff of breath, posture, and biochemistry, the nervous system stuff, especially the autonomic nervous system, will be functioning at a more optimal level, right? So if we jump right into just tricks and things to adjust the nervous system, well, that might be fine for the short term, but long term, it's not really creating any changes, right? So we always want to look at the foundational stuff. And then we jump up kind of into the mental, emotional things. And for athletes, the biggest thing for them at this level is understanding where their limiting beliefs are. And the trick with that is we all develop them. It just is, that's life, right? We all develop them, usually at a pretty young age. Now, if we were consciously aware of them, then we'd probably deal with them, right? So a lot of athletes will develop these unconscious limiting beliefs, and we have ways to kind of elucidate what those are. But if I have a limiting belief, something like, no matter how hard I work, I'm not going to be successful, or, my identity is tied to me winning X, Y, and Z, or what have you, we can go down the list. There's going to be friction there, and that's going to cause problems. And generally what I see with the better players is obviously with juniors and guys just starting out, you want to make sure the anatomy, the posture, the breath, the biochemistry is good. But then what sets apart good players from great players oftentimes is the beliefs they have about themselves and the world around them. And if you can shift those in a positive direction, that's usually where you get the biggest bang for your buck, right?
Yeah.
And then I think a big thing with athletics too, kind of as we go up the list a little bit, is kind of the top two things are I'll use community in a broad sense, right? So my family, my friends, the people I surround myself with, well, that has a direct effect on the athlete. And what I always encourage athletes, especially young athletes, is please keep your life simple. Because it's easy to, as soon as you turn pro and you start making money, you get all these people around you and things get messy real fast. And everyone has a vested interest in getting something from you, right? And that can be helpful or it can be very, very harmful, right? And just like who you choose to spend your time with when you're not playing can be very conducive and supportive to your goal, or it can be the antithesis to what you want, right? And I've just seen a lot of players over the years struggle because certain people in their lives are at odds for what they want with their life. And that makes it really, really hard. And kind of the top level of things that I don't directly deal with is sort of athletes to have sort of a sustained performance usually need to believe in something bigger than themselves. They're doing it for something that's outside of themselves, right? And for some folks, that's religion and spirituality. For some folks, that's other things. But the reality is, if we're just doing it for ourselves, well, that kind of runs out pretty quick after we've accomplished a few things. So looking at the foundational anatomy, posture, breath, biochemistry, looking at the nervous system, looking at the mental emotional levels, understanding kind of the relationship of my family, community, all those things, and then kind of having a bigger picture in mind with everything. Sort of, that's a lot of stuff, but that's sort of what I look at with.
I love that. That's so many things. You know, we will have listeners that work with anyone from a weekend warrior to a top athlete. Mm-hmm. And, you know, to be fair, folks that just want to be healthier. Mm-hmm. For those practitioners, out of everything you just mentioned, what's one thing you wish that they would focus on more with their folks?
So I think when we're talking about like chiros, physios, trainers, all of that stuff, it's beautiful work, because if my body is moving properly and feeling good, that allows all of the other stuff to be worked on, right? If I'm in pain, well, then the only thing I care about is not being in pain, right? So that foundational work becomes so vitally important. But I think the thing that moves the needle most for most people, if they're willing to do it, is the mental emotional level. Like what do you believe about yourself? How do you think about yourself? How do you think about everything else? And that becomes the most vital thing. And in a very real way, you can make yourself sick thinking the wrong thing. Right. I've seen countless time athletes get very, very stressed because of an on-course situation, because of a life situation, whatever. And then next thing you know, they're hurt. Well, they, in a very real way, they manifested it themselves. Mm-hmm. And so having tools, and whatever that looks like for the person, having tools to really allow yourself to clear up that level of things becomes extremely, extremely important. And that doesn't matter if you're, you know, a dad who's got 3 kids who just wants to play golf on the weekends, or you're a recreational athlete or a professional athlete. That's the thing that sort of binds us all together, is our ability to clearly think those things through.
What do you think someone as a practitioner would need to be able to coach that? What skills, what prereqs? I mean, because that's big.
That's exactly what I was thinking
really?
at the same time.
Yeah.
That is big. As a coach or as a trainer, I think you have a unique opportunity, therapist, coach, trainer, in creating an environment that rewards success, but pushes people at the same time. So if you give someone a quote unquote impossible task, they say, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not that person, or whatever, and you show them that they can, well, without getting into any psychology of anything, you're chipping away at their beliefs of themselves. And the next thing you know, all of a sudden they're doing things that they never thought they would. And it doesn't matter if it's a professional athlete or not. That becomes an important thing. So much of what we do is showing people what they can do, right? And even in a pain context, if someone's hurt and says, oh, I can't lift my shoulder, and you do whatever modalities that you do, and all of a sudden they can, it's like, oh, there's hope. I can do these things, right? Same thing with exercise, same thing with everything. So I think it's fostering an environment of support and positivity, but pushing people to kind of acknowledge that, hey, you can't do this because you think you can't do this, but I'm going to show you how. It becomes a wonderful, wonderful thing. And you don't have to delve into, sports psychology or anything.
Well, that's fascinating, really. And well, let's take this a stage further. So let's look at you. Mm-hmm. So if you were being introspective, what would you say has been your biggest failings or weaknesses through this whole philosophy? And what have you done to overcome them?
I am an impatient human being by nature. And I'm a problem solver by nature too. So if there is a problem, I'm like, okay, we can fix this. And the problem with that is some people aren't ready to have their problem solved. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. And that's something I had to learn is you can do the right thing at the wrong time and have an unintended consequence. So you have to know what the problems are, and you have to figure out a way of solving them, but then you also have to have patience. Right? It's like if someone says, I can't do this, or I want to be number one in the world or whatever. Okay, well, there's solutions to that, but it takes time. And I think for me personally too, that's something that I've had to deal with my whole professional career and personal career, is just being massively impatient.
That one I can share.
Right. And I think everyone in sport has that a little bit, because you want to win and you want to win now. And so I've had to learn how to be patient, and bless my wife, she has taught me that very, very well. And it's just, for me, I think it's so much of patience is kind of, you have a goal or what problem you need to solve, and then you have to figure out if that's a month away, 6 months away, 6 years away. Well, what are you going to do in the meantime? And I think that's where people get stuck, is they don't know what to do in the meantime. And so whatever that looks like for you, that's okay. And I think the advice of, if you're struggling with patience, just sit down and meditate, that can be fruitful and helpful. And meditation and mindset stuff for everybody, whatever that looks like for them, is important. But also, in a real tangible way, you kind of have to figure out what to do in the meantime.
Yeah. You have to take some step, in whatever direction.
You got to do something.
Yeah. So I personally, and I'm sure Andy, but I personally love your philosophy. I can imagine, maybe I'm wrong, were there other coaches on the tour or throughout your career, other players that maybe didn't see eye to eye with you and thought your philosophy was too much, too little, and how did you overcome that?
Oh yeah.
What did you see?
So what I would say too is all of this was born out of my personal experience, but then also the in-depth conversations I've had with countless coaches, therapists, trainers, everything. And so this is a credit to everyone that has ever been involved in working with athletes with me, is this all came from all of that, right? Now, you're right. There's people who just, this doesn't matter. They're like, who cares? What are you talking about? And I always joke that I sort of have, I associate myself with sort of the motley crew oddballs of sport performance a little bit. People doing interesting, different things to see, like, if that works, great. And if that was a cool idea in practice, but doesn't sort of hold weight in reality, then that's okay too. But yeah, absolutely. And I think what happens as coaches and therapists and everything is the more clear we get with how we view performance, then we naturally will attract players who are keen to do it that way, right? Versus if we try and be the Swiss Army knife for everybody, that might be helpful for players, but inevitably we lose ourselves because we're trying to be 10 different things for 10 different players, and that's not very helpful. And as I've gotten older, I guess I've sort of been more entrenched in this because I've seen it work time and time and time again. And it's not for everybody. That's okay. I totally recognize that it's not for everybody, and that's fine. My hope would be that eventually people would get there. But it's not for everybody. And yeah, there's been pushback from players and coaches and stuff, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
I think you probably gathered that I'm mad keen about golf, and you know, one thing I know is that mindset for me is absolutely key. So let's get out the professionals for a minute. You know, there's going to be a bunch of people here who are between 5 and 24 handicap players. Have you got any tips for how they can work on their mindset? Because I've seen when I play with my friends every emotion in golf, from anger to kindness to frustration to joy, etc. What aspect of that mindset could they work on as a wannabe good player?
Yeah, I think, Andy, the biggest thing is when a lot of guys go play on the weekend or whatever. You may have stayed up late the night before, you're up early for a tee time, you chug a whole bunch of coffee, you grab a breakfast sandwich, you race to the course, you don't warm up, whatever. And then all of a sudden you're stressed and you haven't even hit a tee shot yet. So, and look, you're having fun with the lads, that's fine, but understand that, like, well, if I didn't sleep well enough and I'm not eating well enough and I'm not hydrating and I chugged a whole bunch of coffee or whatever, it's going to be very hard to control my emotions in that instance.
So basically get at an 11 o'clock tea time.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Have an afternoon tea time, have a nice little lie-in, and then you're fine. I think for folks too, and this is including professionals, is setting expectations of what actually is good. And so especially in golf, I am consistently surprised that even professionals, they'll hit a shot and they'll get mad because it's a quote unquote terrible shot. But statistically, it's not. They just don't understand like what actually good is. And so because when we watch golf on TV, we watch the guys play on TV, they're basically showing us the highlight reel of all of their best shots. We don't see the mishits. We don't see whatever. And as the average golfer, we're not diving into statistics of the PGA Tour because who cares? So we think that we're hitting bad shots or we're doing all these terrible things, when in reality, one, we're probably just not good enough, and that's okay. Yeah. And two, even for the best in the world, they can't hit those shots consistently, right? So it's foundationally, setting myself up for success as far as my mindset, and then expectation-wise, understanding sort of what actually is good and isn't good is important and helpful. And then the other thing too, I think, is, especially for recreational golfers, but professionals too, is just doing the thing. And what I mean by that is just focusing on actually swinging the golf club, and the outcome is going to be the outcome. When it's so easy in golf to get so tied to the outcome that we mess up our whole process. And even with professional guys, I've seen them, miss a 3-foot putt. Fine, you missed a 3-foot putt. But then the next hole, when they're on the tee on the next hole, well, they hook it right into the forest because they're still mad about the putt from before. And that's an experience that we all have when we play. It's eliminating that carryover between shots becomes massively important. It doesn't matter what level of skill we have.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about some of the people that have helped you along the way, and Ian had nothing but wonderful things to say about you. Do you have a mentor or folks or some people that you look up to, and who are they, and maybe why have you kind of stuck with them?
Yeah. So on the medical side, I have a lot of mentors that are sort of the old boys now. They're probably, I think my youngest mentor on the medical side of things is maybe 74, because they've lived enough life experience to sort of figure out what actually works and what doesn't. Right? I think in a day and age where everyone wants to be a self-proclaimed expert right away, that becomes an interesting conundrum. So I've erred on folks who've done it and seen it. And in golf, I'll give a shout out to my good friend Sean Foley, who I traveled on tour with for a long time. He's been a major mentor of mine professionally and personally, because Sean, as a golf coach, has always been willing to figure out what works and put his players first. And so he instilled in me that it's about the player, but it's not about you at all. And his passion for the game is absolutely infectious. So when it comes to the game of golf, Sean's absolutely been my biggest mentor with that.
So Brendan, I think you're aware that strength, kindness, and perspective is the kind of aims of our podcast. So picking up on kindness being at the heart of what we do here, there'll be a bunch of performance coaches and professionals within our network who are listening to this who'd love to make it on the PGA Tour. Have you got 2 or 3 biggest tips for them if they wanted to, succeed like you have?
Back to my point about Sean, it's not about you, it's about the player. And I think we just live in an age where everything's about social media and likes and follows and all of those things. And for the longest time, I didn't even have social media. And I'm going to date myself, and sort of maybe folks will call me a Luddite or something like that. But that was never important. The only thing that was important when I was on tour is helping the guys. And it didn't matter if I posted stuff on Instagram, whatever. It was just helping the guys. And so that's the biggest thing to me is, and where folks get stuck, because they attribute the player's success to their own success. And yeah, you play a role in it, right? You play a role in it for sure. But at the end of the day, it's always about the player, right? Or the athlete or the team or what have you. It doesn't matter what sport. And I think there is always trying to develop your skills as much as possible. So hard skills of whether you're a therapist, becoming the best possible therapist you can, whether you're a trainer, becoming the best possible trainer you can. But then also the soft skills too, right? Like, how do you relate to people? How do you communicate with people? And some folks that comes naturally, and some folks have to work on that a little bit. That becomes a massive, massive thing. And on some level too, what I said is it's not about you, it's about the player. But at the same time, the thing that drives sort of the folks that I've always seen, whether they're coaches or therapists or whatever, is they want it more than the player. They stay up at night trying to figure out how to help them. And it's that sort of that insatiable desire to help the player and have them succeed that makes great therapists, trainers, coaches, what have you. They sort of live and breathe it all the time because it's so important for them. And so having whatever sport you're in, having a love for the sport and a desire to have a very high level of skill at whatever you do, and then making it about the players leads to a lot of success.
So Brendan, we have a couple more questions for you, but one we always like to ask folks is based off of the 3 pillars of our podcast, which is strength, kindness, and perspective. You've shown an awesome perspective. I really loved hearing about it. A little bit unique. And I think something more and more folks are adopting. Your strength has been interesting as far as you're not for everybody, and that's okay. But kindness, I'd like to ask you about that a little bit. Is there someone you'd like to give a leg up to or a shout out to on this episode?
No one in particular, but really what I want to shout out is all of the guys and girls who are working their butts off. Because I know how hard it is. I know there's times where you're like, man, am I doing the right thing? Should I learn more? Should I go back to school? Should I do this? Should I do that? Just keep doing it. And I just encourage, especially all the young therapists, trainers, coaches, just keep doing it and keep working on your craft and fall in love with it and just keep trying to be the best that you possibly can, because it's a hard road sometimes, for sure. And there's fun moments and there's glamorous moments and stuff like that, but it is a hard road. So, and on that, if anyone ever just wants to, any coaches, trainers, whatever, just want to chat, I'm open to that whenever. Kind of relay some of my experience for what it's worth, because I know it can feel heavy and it can feel hard, especially when you're basically living your life for somebody else or a whole team of people, right? It can be hard, and so it's worth it, I think, at the end of the day, for sure, because you get to do something you love and you get to make a positive change in people's lives. But it's a lot sometimes, and that's okay. And so I know what it's like. I've gone through the whole thing. I've gone through the trenches. I've had those moments of sort of self-doubt and all those things. So anyone who's been like, man, this is a lot, that's okay. You will absolutely get through it and you will be successful and have an amazing career. But anyone who wants to chat, I'm always open for that. So
if there are people listening that would like to chat, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Easiest way to get in touch, probably my website, aquarianhealthsolutions.com, or you can go on Instagram, Dr. B. McLaughlin, and you can reach me there. You can shoot me a message, or you can go on the website and reach out to me there. That's probably the two easiest ways.
Well, Brendan, this has been fascinating for me. As a mad keen golfer, I've got to ask this question. So if you could meet and have dinner with three golfers from any era, who would they be?
That's a great question. Sam Snead, because he just knew how to win. Seve, because he was the most entertaining golfer I've ever seen. And Ben Hogan, because Ben was ahead of his time in many, many ways, and an unbelievable golfer. And those would be my three for sure. I think that'd be a fun dinner.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.